for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. John Duval is one of the legends of the Australian wine industry, known for his work as chief winemaker at Penfolds, where he was in charge of making Grange, among other things, and since 2003, at his eponymous family winery. I caught up with him from his beloved Barossa Valley to chat about Shiraz, old vines, his love of Priorat, Chile and the northern Rhône, what he learnt from Max Schubert, and why Cat's Pyjamas is a really bad name for a wine. Hello, John, and welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be with you, Tim.
And thank you for doing it late at night. I mean, you've had a busy day, haven't you?
I had an early start at a round of golf, but it's not going to stop me from doing the podcast.
It's 10 o'clock at night where you are, so you're in Tanunda, with the heart of the Barossa, of course, right?
Indeed.
Just tell us a bit about you, your upbringing. I didn't know this, I started researching it. You were brought up on a sheep farm, weren't you, with a vineyard in Morphett Vale, just south of Adelaide. Which was more important? Was it the sheep or the grapes?
I think I'd have to say, I was on the farm when I was fairly young, but the sheep stud was quite famous, the Pembury Suffolk sheep stud. And my grandfather was actually the only member outside of the UK of the British Suffolk Breeders Association, and we used to export our stud sheep all around the world. So it was quite well known.
But a vineyard as well, wasn't it? You were selling grapes, weren't you?
Yeah, we did. We had Shiraz and Grange, two separate locations in the township of Morphett Vale as part of the farm. And Penfolds, we used to sell the Shiraz to Penfolds actually, and Penfolds liked the Shiraz so much they took cuttings off the property to replant Summer Magill, which was the original vineyard site with Dr. Penfolds when he first founded the company in 1844.
And did you spend time in the vineyards as a kid?
Not so much. I was pretty young, but I can remember obviously I was going to school, but on the weekends, I think my father used to sell some of the Grenache in particular to Italian Australians who wanted to make a bit of home wine. So I can remember sort of carrying buckets and helping out a bit with the Grenache, but not so much the Shiraz. I think that was happening while we were at school.
Yeah. And your family been on the farm since, the late 19th century? But I think I'm right in saying you were the first Duval to make wine. Is that right? I mean, your dad was selling grapes, basically.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the first winemaker in the family.
And when did you decide you wanted to go into wine and be a winemaker? Was it something that you were thinking of as a teenager, or did it come later?
Well, I finished up doing an agricultural science degree at Adelaide University, and the first and second year at the North Terrace campus, and the third and fourth year of the ag degree was at Waite Institute, which is right across the road from the Australian Wine Research Institute. So I majored in horticulture and biochemistry, and worked out that with the ag degree I could short circuit the winemaking course at Roseworthy. So it seemed quite appealing. I didn't want to. I think our land at Morphett Vale was being compulsorily acquired by the government for housing development. So there wasn't going to be a big future on the farm for me. And it seemed the wine industry was starting to grow in favour, and it looked promising and interesting.
Because you graduated, I think, 73, didn't you?
That's right, yeah. I did my ag course, I did the Roseworthy winemaking course.
The Roseworthy. Yeah. I mean, just what sort of shape was the wine industry in Australia in those days? I mean, was it still dominated by fortifieds? It probably was, wasn't it, in the early 70s?
Well, certainly when I started with Penfolds in 1974, there was probably more fortified wine being made at the Priorat winery in the Barossa than table wine. So I saw a real change over the years I was there.
And had the kind of cool climate movement got going? I mean, Margaret River wasn't up and running by then, was it? The Yarra? Well, I mean, the new Yarra. I mean, not the old Yarra, but...
Probably not as we know it now, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's a history that goes back a long, long way, but the expansion wouldn't have taken place or just starting to.
And so it was mostly focused on warmer climate areas, was it?
Pretty much so. I mean, Penfolds really had vineyards in the Hunter Valley, ran Griffith in the MIA. There was obviously McGill, although when I first started in 1974, that was the first vintage that there was no grapes processed at McGill. It was all brought up to the Barossa, to Nuriupa.
Yeah.
So things were starting, but it was but still fortifieds were quite strong.
And even at Penfolds was known for its fortifieds,
Exactly.
was it? Yeah. I mean, how did you get the job at Penfolds? Was it that partly that family connection that you've been selling, your dad had been selling grapes to Penfolds, the Shiraz grapes and the cuttings?
Not so much. It was just, I think I was responding to, I don't think I saw an official job advertisement, but through word of mouth, I heard that Penfolds may be looking for a young graduate. So I made an appointment with Mike Press, who was the South Australian production manager. And I can remember being interviewed in Max Schubert's office, actually, and which was quite fitting and very memorable, actually.
And Max Schubert was there. You weren't just in his office, right?
No, he wasn't there. I mean, Mike thought, well, Max wasn't there, so he was going to interview me in Max's office. So
yeah, and so you were still a young kid then, basically. It was your first wine job.
Yeah, I would have been 22, 23. Yeah, exactly.
And your job title was what? Assistant winemaker?
Assistant winemaker.
Yeah. Cellar rat.
Exactly.
Yeah, slightly more glorified, maybe.
Chef, cook, and bottle washer. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, Max Schubert, this sort of legend who invented Grange and kind of went on making in secret when people tried to stop him. This wine became its most famous red. I mean, was he still around when you were there? Did you learn from him?
There was a transition when I joined the company between Max retiring from day-to-day activities and Don Ditter taking over as chief winemaker. Max was still on the board, but Max was based at McGill, and he was involved more with head office. In my sort of early years, I probably saw more of Don Ditter, although Don was based in Sydney. Yeah. But he used to obviously travel around all the wineries quite frequently. So I spent a lot more time in those early days with Don than Max. And it's interesting, I probably spent more time with Max once I became chief winemaker. And sort of I could half jokingly say by that stage I probably knew what questions to ask of Max. But we used to get Max, invite him up to the Barossa for lunch with the winemaking team, and he'd say, well, John, I'm happy to join you for lunch, but make sure you get Linky's pies and pasties for me, because I think he was under strict doctor's orders on his diet from on the home front and his doctor.
And was he daunting to spend time with him as this kind of legendary figure?
Well, when I first started in 1974, yes, he was that legendary figure. I guess after 12 years sort of under my belt and being promoted chief winemaker, I felt pretty confident in his company, and we had some good times together, actually.
And were they very different, Max and Don Ditter?
Yeah, well, Max was, I think, a lot mellower. I think reading between the lines and sort of talking to a lot of Penfolds people, he was a pretty strong-willed, and I think for him to develop Grange and everything else that he did for the company, he had to be a pretty strong-willed guy, and I think that was the time as well. And Don was a great palate, great blender, and he was a top guy as well.
And I mean, who did you learn more from of the two?
Probably in the early days it would have been Don, because I was seeing him more frequently, and I probably learned how to taste with Don as well, because I know we used to review wine show entries and do a lot of tasting when he'd visit from Sydney.
I mean, you did a great job, obviously, as assistant winemaker, because 12 years later you took over from Don, as chief winemaker. I mean, what's it like taking over an icon? I mean, okay, you've been working with the brand, with Grange for 12 years by then. But, I mean, were you tempted to tweak or change the style? Or do you just get told to leave it alone?
Very interesting question, because I think there is obviously there's a house style for Penfolds. And I
Yeah.
think you'd be a brave winemaker if you wanted to change the house style of Penfolds. But what we would do is look at all the elements that are responsible for quality without changing the fundamental winemaking approach. I mean, how can we get the best grapes? How can we make sure the oak we use is the best quality, etc. So it was a fine tuning rather than any winemaking philosophy change.
Yeah. And did you change some of the grape sources then?
Well, we put a lot of time and effort into finding Grange style vineyards or Grange potential vineyards, and that was a very important work. And I think it's still obviously a key plank in the Penfolds sort of winemaking philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, you've probably tasted more vintages of Grange than anybody. Maybe Peter Gago will have tasted as many now as you. But do you have a favourite vintage or a couple of favourite vintages of Grange? And are they the ones that everybody else likes? Or are they things you think, do you know what? I remember how hard that was to make or something like that in that year.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started as chief winemaker from the 97 vintage through to 2002. And probably the sentimental vintage for me was 1990 because it won amazing awards all over the world and helped put Grange and Penfolds and Australia on the map to a certain extent. But there's a vintage in the 90s that I really like, as well as the 96. It's I think there's an elegance and a finesse, and I just love that wine.
Yeah. I mean, at Penfolds, you're also in charge of Bin 707, Bin 389, St. Henri, and you were responsible, I think, for developing Bin 138, Bin 407, and RWT, Barossa Shiraz. Just tell us which of those represented the greatest challenge, and I just wonder again which one you're proudest of your work in developing it.
Well, I love making the 138, and probably back that up by, we'll probably talk about in a few questions' time about the first wine I released under the John Duval Wines family label. But it's a blend of old vine, Shiraz, Grenache, and Mourvèdre, or Mataro as we call it as well. So I made the first vintage of that particular 138. And I love working with those old vineyards, and that's part of the history of the Barossa. That we think the oldest Shiraz, Grenache, and Mourvèdre in the world on their own roots in the Barossa. So it was great working with those old vineyards. Bin 407, I think that I was tempted to release the first vintage in 89, but I've always believed in the philosophy of wait for the great vintages when you're releasing a new wine. And when 90 came along, we just jumped at it. And that was the first vintage of Bin 407. And look where that's gone now. I mean, my son Tim and I recently returned from China, and it is absolutely a cult wine in China. And obviously it's gone from strength to strength. And then RWT, I've got a real soft spot for RWT because that was my idea to develop that wine rather than a marketing idea, because Grange is not usually 100% Barossa. It can use vineyards from other areas, etc., in South Australia. But I wanted to develop a wine that focused entirely from the Barossa Valley, but aged in French oak rather than new American oak like the traditional wines like Grange and 707 are matured in. So, and an elegance about the wine as well. So, and I'm really pleased that that's continued on as an important part of the portfolio for Penfolds.
And part of your legacy, really, at Penfolds, yeah?
Yes, I guess so.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in 2001, Southcorp, who were the owner of Penfolds, merged with Rosemount. Slightly strange merger, wasn't it? But was that part of the reason you decided to leave and do your own thing? I remember seeing you at the time when you were there, and, you know, I'm used to seeing you with a big smile on your face, and you looked as if it was a bit of a strain. I don't know if you can allow to talk about that. Was it a difficult period in your life, leaving?
Well, when you look at what I was doing with the company, with the broader Southcorp, the parent company of Penfolds, I used to wear two hats. I was chief winemaker of Penfolds, but I was joint chief winemaker of total Southcorp and responsible for all all the fortified and red wine in the total company. So, which involved a lot more travel. I was on the executive committee, so I had to go to Sydney for head office for management meetings once, sometimes twice a month. And it was getting more difficult to be close to the cellar floor and vineyards. So the seed had already been planted in terms of do I want to go down this path forever? And then I guess the company was getting more corporate, and the Rosemount and situation as well just crystallised it in my mind that if ever there was a time to do something for myself and my family, now was the time.
That was it, yeah.
And I think my timing was pretty good, because just a few months after I left, Foster's came marching over the hill as well, so it got even bigger.
It got worse. I mean, you set up John Duval Wines, and your focus there is on the Barossa Valley. Now, before we talk about the wines, just tell us a little bit about the Barossa, because there'll be some people listening to the podcast who've never been there, haven't read about it. Just give us a quick overview. Where is it? Main soil types, climatic influences, and maybe just the different sub-regions. Can you give us a couple of minutes on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We talk about the Barossa zone comprising of two valleys, the Barossa Valley to the west and Eden Valley to the east. Now, the Barossa is about an hour's drive northeast of Adelaide, the capital of South Australia. It's very much a Mediterranean climate, so we get winter and mostly spring rain. Summer can be warm to hot and reasonably dry. There is distinct differences in elevation. The Barossa Valley to the west is lower altitude, probably between sort of 200 and 350 metres elevation. Eden Valley is probably 350 to about 550. And depending on the variety where you're placed in the Barossa Valley or Eden Valley, there could be 2 to 3 weeks later ripening in Eden Valley because it's higher, it's cooler. Soil variation, Eden Valley, they tend to be sort of shallower soils, more podzolic, more acidic soils, so with schisty outcrops. And Barossa Valley can have quite a range from sort of the hard cracking sort of Bay of Biscay soils in the southern Barossa Valley to sandy loams and the red-brown earths of the Ebenezer northern Barossa. So there's distinct sub-regions within both the Barossa Valley and Eden Valley.
And it's a region that can go from growing Grenache for fortified sometimes to Riesling, right?
That's people don't realise that within sort of 30, 40 kilometres you can produce sort of world-class Rieslings and some fantastic fortified wines as well. So it's quite unique in that aspect.
Yeah. I mean, how did you decide on the styles of wine that you wanted to make at John Duval Wines? I mean, was in a way part of the idea to produce something that didn't taste like Penfolds? Did you think I need to make a break with that style or not?
Well, the first couple of wines I made, the first wine I made was the Plexus Shiraz Grenache Mourvèdre blend in 2003, just releasing one wine. And it did surprise a lot of people. A lot of people were expecting me to release small volumes
Shiraz, right? Yeah.
of Shiraz, high-priced. And I really wanted to build a base for the business. So Plexus, Shiraz Grenache Mourvèdre, and then in 2004 with Entity Shiraz, they weren't entry pricing, but they weren't super expensive as well. There was an opportunity for people to buy the wine, to try the wine, and get my name about, and then maybe later on have a little bit more fun at the top end of the market with other wines as well. But so that's how it started.
And were they vineyards that you'd used and known at Penfolds, or did you go looking for other sources of fruit?
Life wasn't meant to be easy, so you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that all the top vineyards that Penfolds had access to were contracted. And I was very, very careful because I was still consulting to Penfolds. They asked me to come back and help with the classification and blending for the 2003, 2004 and and then finished up in 2005 as well. So it was an interesting time because there was a lot of movement in the large end of town and some of the corporate wineries, and some of the growers got a bit nervous about supplying 100% to a big winery. So they said, well, we're happy to give you 50%, but we want to supply some of the smaller winemakers some of our fruit as well. So I got a leg in, sort of leaving and respecting contracts and not going near that, and then joined the club, so to speak, in terms of some of the grape vineyards in the Barossa.
Yeah. You said, your first wine was this SGM. Second one, Entity, was a pure Shiraz, so normal service resumed in a way. Just tell us a bit more about Shiraz, because you're so often associated with it as a variety. What's it like to farm and work within the winery? Is it as an easy grape to get the best out of?
Shiraz by nature actually is quite a vigorous variety. So the soils and climate of the Barossa are quite suited to Shiraz, and I think the amount of old vineyard Shiraz is testament to that point. It's, from a winemaking point of view, it's a reductive variety, so air is an important part of the winemaking. I've made Shiraz, or Syrah as it's called in other parts of the world, in 3 continents, and what I've concluded is it's a remarkable variety of expressions of the variety, from cool climate styles to warm region styles. I actually think it shows more influence of terroir than what Cabernet does. I mean, sure, Cabernet varies from where it's planted, where it's made, but there's a Cabernet thumbprint. But Shiraz Syrah, or Shiraz stroke Syrah, can have quite a variety of expressions.
Yeah. So it's interesting you're saying reduction is the big challenge, is it, in a way? Or avoiding it?
Well, it's the opposite to Grenache. Grenache is quite oxidative, so I think what we're doing now, we're taking our old vine Grenache much more seriously, picking earlier, keeping it oxygenated away. Sort of it's a more savoury style of Grenache we're making. So a completely different winemaking approach to Shiraz.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned Shiraz and Syrah, which are obviously synonyms, but does that mean that the stylistic approach is slightly different if somebody's making a Syrah as opposed to a Shiraz? I mean, can a consumer look at a label and think, okay, Shiraz, I know what this is going to taste like. Syrah, I know what it's going to taste like?
Well, I think most of the wines are labelled as Shiraz in Australia, but there's probably quite a few also named as Syrah. And yes, I think you're right. There's an attempt by winemakers to indicate to the public that it's made in a more elegant style.
Yeah, yeah. And Syrah would be more cool climate, northern Rhône, whatever you want to call it, really.
That's right. Obviously, the variety comes from the Rhône Valley in France, and it's been disseminated from that. And exactly.
How many wines do you make now? Because I thought they were all red, but there's a white in there, isn't there? That's sneaked in, isn't it? A white Rhône blend.
Yeah. Well, I got sick of using other people's white wines when I was doing a tasting, or let me tell you, at home we never run out of red wine, but if I forgot to buy the white, I used to get in trouble with my wife, Pat. So there was one way to fix that: make a bloody white. So then the question was, what style? And there's lots of Rieslings and Semillons about as well. But I took a particular interest in the Rhône white style. So in 2010, which was the first vintage we made, the Plexus White, which is a blend of Marsanne, Roussanne and Viognier. So I like the style, I like the texture. It's a very food-friendly style, and I really enjoy making the wine.
And how many reds do you make alongside that?
We're up to about 10 reds now.
Right, okay. And all Mediterranean, inverted commas, varieties, yeah?
We do make two Well, we make a Cabernet, a Compono, which is a fairly new wine, and then Integro, which is a Cabernet Shiraz blend, which is a top-end wine.
And do you own any of your own vineyards, or is it all purchased fruit?
No, it's all relationship-based with the grower community. I mean, I half-jokingly say after 29 years for Penfolds, I know where the good vineyards are. So
You'd hope so, right?
Yeah, it's about relationships, and I feel quite honoured that a lot of the great families of the Barossa, the 5th, 6th, 7th generation families that own vineyards at 100 years and more, sort of are willing to be part of our project.
Yeah. And does the old family farm exist, any of it, or did it all go with urban development?
Unfortunately, a lot of the land was subdivided, compulsory required by the government. I don't think you'll see that sort of thing happening anymore, because it was of recent times there's been a lot of song and a dance about stopping the sprawl into agricultural areas. So, but too late. It's all gone.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? I think you still consult to a number of wineries, don't you?
I'm actually pulled back. I mean, I'm still working with Ventisquera in Chile, and we can talk more about that, and also Long Shadows. But the consulting side, I've basically stopped now.
Yeah. I mean, when you were doing it, I mean, I'm sure you're very good at it because you're such a nice person and I can't see you imposing a style on people, but I just want to ask you what makes a good consultant? If you've seen other people doing it and when you were doing it, what are the things that a good consultant does?
I think obviously you need to have a good palate. You have to be a very good listener and respect terroir. There's no use sort of coming in trying to make a Barossa style Shiraz in Chile or Washington State. It's working out what's best suited for the particular vineyard site, the soils and climate where you are.
And managing egos. The egos often of the proprietor, not necessarily the winemaker.
That's right. I mean, I think you've got to pick people and pick your mark, and don't try and change too much straight away.
Yeah, that's a good thing. But you mentioned these other two projects that you are doing, and I think of those almost as joint ventures. Would that be correct?
Well, probably Long Shadows, the Washington State project, was a really interesting project. I was involved from 2003 when it was publicised that I was leaving Penfolds to start my own family business. I got lots of phone calls from all over the world inviting me to, well, a lot of people want to put money into our family business, and I've seen too many people lose control of their own business by taking in outside money. So even if the development of our family business was slower, I was happy to keep that 100% family owned. But Long Shadows was one of the phone calls I was happy to take. It was a really interesting project. Alan Shoup, the late Alan Shoup, he passed away nearly 2 years ago now, I think. He ran Chateau Saint Michel for, I think it was over 20 years. And when he left, he still decided he wanted to be involved in the Washington State industry and do something for the industry. So he invited winemakers from different parts of the world to come into Washington State to make their specialty variety. So he had people like Michel Rolland making a Merlot, the Folinari family from Italy making an Italian blend, Randy Dunn from the Napa making a Cabernet, and Philippe Melka, French consultant in Napa, was involved as well. And I got asked to make the Syrah, which we called Sequel. Actually, it was a bit of a funny story how the name Sequel came to be as well. Alan was very well aware that there's some pretty irreverent names for Australian wines, so he was suggesting that we might like to call this new Shiraz we'd made Cat's Pyjamas. And I did have to remind Alan what price we were charging for the wine. So in the end, it was a sequel to his career and a sequel to my career. So sequel Syrah it was. So
I love that. And what about Ventisquero? Because when Ventisquero, we're both good friends with Felipe Tosto. Wonderful.
Yeah, just before we leave Washington, when COVID came along, it was difficult for all the winemakers to travel to Washington, so they bought out our brand from us. So I'm not really involved on a hands-on business with
Okay.
Sequel anymore.
Yeah.
So, but still,
And Ventisquero?
Ventisquero, yeah, very much involved still with Felipe Tosso and his winemaking team. And again, that started, my first trip to Chile was in 2003. So, up until probably the last couple of years, I've gone, minus the COVID years, I've gone a couple of times a year. So again, I'm sort of trying to sort of slow up a little bit and not travel quite so much. And Felipe's quite happy to visit the Barossa and sent about 20 cases of samples. So we do a lot of tasting and blending as well.
And is the main wine you make there Pangea, which is a Syrah?
Yeah, it's Pangea. There's Vetus, the Carmenere Syrah blend as well, Enclave, Cabernet. So there's quite a range of wines I get involved with. So it's they've done well from a standing start, though, a significant wine company in Chile now.
Yeah, and they're very good wines. I just want to ask you, do you think there's a John Duval style? And if so, how would you describe it? Do you want somebody to pick up a wine and say, this is a John Duval wine?
I guess if you're looking for a description, what we're trying to achieve is an elegant expression of old vineyards. And so that, I think that sums up whether people are going to pick that up and say this is John Duval wine. But certainly we're not trying to make the 15% plus style of Barossa wine. It's modern Barossa.
Yeah. And do those 15.5% alcohol wines still exist? Are people still making them?
Not as many as there used to be. I mean, some people sort of like that style, and I mean it depends on the balance, of course, and there's lots of other factors. But certainly it's not a style that I particularly look to.
Yeah, and what's the key to elegance? Is it picking earlier? Is it the way you extract tannins? Is it oak usage? I mean, what is it that gives you that elegance? Do you think? I mean, place obviously, but
well, I think it's got to be a well-managed vineyard for the start, because you want flavour accumulation and tannin ripeness before the sugar levels get too high. So you don't want to have to wait for flavour and tannin ripeness while the sugar level's going up, which effectively means higher alcohol. So,
and that's the importance of those great vineyards, right, that you're working with.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I've always wanted to ask you, is there anywhere in the world you haven't made wine? I mean, obviously you're doing stuff in Washington, or you were doing stuff in Washington State, and you were still very heavily involved with Ventisquero in Australia, where you haven't made wine where you'd like to. Have you ever thought, I'd like to have a go at the Northern Rhône? Have you ever made wine in the Northern Rhône?
No, I haven't, and that would be really interesting. That there's only so much you can do. There's only so many vintages that you can do. The other area that I find quite fascinating is Priorat as well. So,
have you been to Priorat?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing place, isn't it?
It's an amazing place. That's right, and just to see those vines in almost pure rock on the slopes, and pretty interesting part of the world.
Yeah, and you mentioned making a white wine, so you had something to show in wine tastings. What styles of wine do you like to drink at home? Are you a bit of a wine collector as well?
Not so much a collector. We like to sort of drink around and see what's happening. I mean, obviously, when I used to travel to Washington State and still involved in Chile, we like to try other producers' wines as well. But my wife and I, Pat and I, we probably drink softer wines than what we did before. I like the new style of Grenache that's being made. Top-end Australian Chardonnay is pretty amazing at the moment. I enjoy that. We've just got back from Tasmania, having a week in Tasmania. Matter of fact, we drank a very good Tasmanian Chardonnay tonight. Pinot, again, in the milder, softer, savoury styles, more medium weight rather than sort of firm styles these days. So, yeah.
Sounds great. And your son, Tim, another Tim, you're the 5th generation. He's the 6th generation. He's now working alongside you in the winery. I think he was a lawyer, wasn't he, in Adelaide for 7 years and decided to join the family business. What are you trying to pass on to him? Is he alongside you in the winemaking already?
Absolutely. I mean, he's fronting up for his 10th vintage in a few weeks, and he's been fantastic. He virtually runs the company on a daily basis now, and then I get involved with Tim in the vineyard work and during vintage and winemaking. We taste together, we blend together. So he's right across everything. And I'm coming up from a 52nd vintage, so I'm pulling back. I've can't be everywhere, can't do everything. So we got some very capable hands with Tim.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's learnt a lot from you. But what have you learnt from working with your son?
Business skills. Yeah, he's. I think he did a double degree law and marketing, so he's got a set of skills that are very useful for the business.
Yeah. Last questions. I ask everyone this, and their responses are very different. Is how do you get away from wine? I know you're a bit of a keen golfer. Weren't you playing this morning? I think you said.
Indeed, I am. Yes, I love golf. I wish I was better at it than what I am, but it gets you in. It's good exercise, keeps the body moving. But I'm very fortunate. My wife Pat, we love food, wine, and travel. So that's great. We like travelling, and I guess of more recent times, grandchildren as well. So. We've got 3 granddaughters and another grandchild on the way, so which is fantastic.
Yeah. So give us the numbers. What's your handicap?
My ability.
And then what about the grandkids? How many grandkids have you got?
We've got 3 granddaughters and Tim's wife, Nicola, is pregnant, so we're expecting another grandchild in the middle of the year.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, many congratulations. Have you still got any old vintages of Grange at home that you tuck into from time to time?
I've got the odd bottle, but I was never one to get Max to sign a whole lot of wines for me. I did ask Max to sign a bottle of Grange once because somebody asked me if I could get Max to do it for a charity auction. So, and of course, you see in the wine auctions, some of really expensive wines, back vintages of Grange signed by Max. So Max's legend lives on. And
did he sign one for you?
As I said, I never asked him to do it for me.
Yeah. Okay, so you got him to sign one for somebody else for the auction.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame. It'd be nice to have a memento, wouldn't
it? Yeah. But I've got very good memories.
That's all we need. John Duval, legend, thank you for staying up late in the evening in the Barossa Valley to talk to us and share your amazing life story with us. It's been great to talk to you.
It's a pleasure, Tim.
John is such a modest man, but his legacy is remarkable. I love what he's doing at John Duval Wines with his son, Tim. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the journalist Felicity Carter, who's an expert on health and alcohol policy. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.